I was doing a little doom scrolling and I saw where there was some awards show. Can't remember which, wouldn't care to say anyway. But the article, which I only skimmed, touched on what different celebrities were saying about current events. And it occurred to me that there was a time in recent decades when the place from which such people would speak was perceivably elevated, a podium, such that they were on a pedestal, to be seen by everyone. And that the ability to be seen by everyone was more unique. It was a more unique thing about that podium. But now, I don't see that podium as being any more elevated than the millions of other podiums that technology has allowed us to both witness and stand on. I have no sense that we should pay any particular attention to any particular podium anymore. The podiums are flatter now. Only censorship and astroturfing can change that now. Promotion or restriction by algorithms. Censorship by algorithm is a way to relieve the demand pressure for change by giving people an echo chamber to yell into that will only be heard by like-minded people, keeping society broken up into this honeycomb of echo chambers wherein nobody changes their mind for an exposure to only agreement. It keeps things pretty much static. It makes for this ongoing tension between useful idiots who each point to their partition of the uniparty for the solution. And I'm going to get to those actors in a moment, but the effect is kind of like a bucket shop. There was an establishment called a bucket shop. I heard this from a channel called Manico 64, and I think the guy was Jesse Livermore was the person he referred to, but he would run a shop wherein people would make bets on stocks, and there was some kind of margin wherein if you go below and lose, you lose all your principal, and then you get the upside. But the thing is that these trades, so to speak, these selections of stocks never made their way into the market. They never put any demand pressure on the actual stock. It was just like a side bet that had no demand pressure on the security. And that's what we kind of have through this creation of echo chamber, is the bucket shop. It has no bearing. It's like a tree in the woods that falls and nobody hears it. A closed place in which things are said, but they never touch any kind of power. But the actors, the people of the uniparty are just that, actors. There are few, if any, self-made men among them. They're a product, just like boy bands, discovered, groomed, funded, and sold as a product to the public. They're just the head of a pimple that is wearing them like Hannibal Lecter wears a guard's face. I'm not saying that the moneyed interests are the only powerful constituency. I do think each party has its own wing of populists that are rapidly beginning to see that between them there's a core of actors under moneyed influence. But this wasn't meant to be a political talk, more of a commentary on the state of the man behind the curtain. Because, like I said, he's not the only powerful interest. But more and more, I'm trying to figure out why we even listen to the man behind the curtain. I had occasion to visit a prison once. I didn't actually go in, but I drove somebody to visit a relative. It was a long distance. This prison was smack dab in the middle of Texas. The prisoner was getting close to the end of his sentence, and this was kind of a lower security unit to transition him out. He'd been in there for 8 years for the crime of check fraud. And this was probably 8 years ago, so his crime was maybe 16 years back, maybe 17 or 18, because it takes time to get somebody into prison. But let's say maybe it was almost 20 years ago, and that was a time when the ratio between law enforcers and petty scammers was such that a person could be held to this level of accountability. I don't see that today. Sure, the wrong person in the wrong place at the wrong time could get a draconian sentence, but the sheer volume of graft going on in our society, with everybody being able to touch everybody, I mean, so much of this even comes from overseas. It's too much for law enforcement to keep up with, but I digress. The point I was getting at about this guy is that it was clear to me that his status as a convict disqualified him from so many of the basic privileges that we take for granted. And this man wasn't a violator of the underaged. He wasn't a violent criminal either. He was a simple thief who probably was supporting some kind of habit. I'm not pleading his righteousness, but it's clear to me that the people who work for the man behind the curtain have surety bonds that, if they were revealed, would disqualify them from even getting air in a prison. When can we sit down and open the books and see who should be disqualified, and then figure out who their sponsors are and who their handlers are, and uproot them from having any authority ever again? It sounds like too many people would get hurt, is the attitude. And again, I say that the checks and balances are gone, that the rats have taken over. I think humans are no different than they've ever been, and corruption is nothing new. But it does make me wonder if we have lost some enforcement mechanisms among the elite along the way that were used to keep themselves in check, such as the institution of dueling. I'm not saying there's great wisdom in this institution and that it couldn't be used for great harm and abuse, as I'm sure it has been. But there is a correlation between cowardice and unconsciousness, and if walking the halls of power required a deeper appearance of being honorable, more than just the surface, the consequence of dishonor and failure to uphold that decorum being the prospect of a life or death duel, the alternative to which is a banishment from those halls of power, would seem to be a selection process that would preclude a certain unsavory cut of man from getting in. The mechanism of this correlation between cowardice and unconsciousness is that they are both a function of body identification. It is not the decadent who will put themselves on the line physically for a spiritual truth. The decadent run to pleasure as a distraction from their fear, which is a product of their body identification. The more deeply identified with it, the more decadent. While, on the flip side, those who find themselves accountable to some higher truth that somewhat dissociates them from the fate of the body and the fear for it, they carry a willingness to put themselves on the line for higher principles. Just look at holy wars. Look at the holy wars. I'm not advocating for holy wars, but I submit to you that the fall of the Persian Empire at the hands of religiously zealous Bedouins had something to do with the strength of their convictions relative to the state of those they encountered in a decadent Persian Empire. In fact, this is how it is now. across the entire West, a corrupt system headed by compromised theater kids trying to feed the male population into a meat grinder of war that they are trying to instigate. Why did we listen to these people? I'm not saying we need to bring back dueling, but I think the books need to be opened and the chips should fall where they may. There is a real consequence to corruption, and that is the hijacking of the direction of a society against the interests of its populace, and I think that's where we are. That's all for now.